Bayou's Horrifying Secret, Part 2. Therese's voice trembled as she spoke of La Bête du Bayou.
"It's a dive bar," she muttered. "I never knew Gabby was working there."
I could see the confusion and hurt in her eyes, the realization that her daughter had a secret life she was not privy to. There were clearly many layers to Gabby that her mother was unaware of. A knot formed in my stomach, an unsettling mixture of empathy for Therese and an investigator's curiosity. This new lead was too compelling to ignore. We decided to make La Bête du Bayou our next stop. As we drove through Bellefontaine, an eerie quiet engulfed the town. Dusk had cast long shadows that danced with the flickering of dim streetlights, adding to the sense of unease. It felt as if there were unseen eyes peering out from the darkness of every corner, from every silent alleyway, from behind every shuttered window. La Bête du Bayou loomed ahead, a weathered two-story relic with a creaky wooden door. As our headlights lit up its flaking facade, a jolt of recognition surged through me. I pulled out Gabby's sketchbook. There it was, the same building drawn in charcoal right down to the uneven windows and precarious sign. As we stepped through the entrance, the lively chatter and raucous laughter came to an abrupt halt. The air, heavy with the tang of beer and fried food, was suddenly charged with tension. Conversations stopped midway and the notes of a blues song lingered, choked by the sudden silence. Our presence disrupted the atmosphere like a drop of ink in clear water. Faces turned, eyes narrowed, and stares lingered just a touch too long. Their disgust was palpable, barely hidden beneath layers of southern politeness. The hostility was subtle, yet not unexpected. The chill that spread through the room was familiar. We were no strangers to disapproving stares. We'd faced such stares in places closer to home. We understood without saying it aloud. Ash's arm came to rest protectively around my waist. His touch was a quiet reassurance, a promise of solidarity that bolstered my resolve. In response, I gave him a slight nod and squeezed his hand, murmuring, "We've got this, Ash." We moved forward towards the bar, taking in our surroundings. The light hum of conversation gradually picked up again, though now peppered with furtive glances and hushed whispers, their vile comments cloaked in French. We saw a young man around Gabby's age clearing a table nearby. His name tag read Lucien, matching the style of the one we found in Gabby's hidden box. Seeing an opportunity, we approached him. "Excuse me, Lucien," Ash began, flashing him a reassuring smile. His eyes darted to us again, a hint of fear in his gaze. "We're looking for the owner," I added, my voice steady. "Remy," he stammered. "The owner. His name's Remy." He hesitated for a moment, glancing around as though afraid to be seen talking to us. "I'll get him," he finally said, scurrying off towards the back. Minutes later, a man emerged from behind the curtains that separated the bar from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. He was in his late 40s with a grizzled beard and eyes that had seen a lot of life. He was built like a wrestler, every inch of him radiating an intimidating presence. Y'all the ones asking for me?" His gruff voice echoed through the now quiet bar. He didn't introduce himself, but there was no need. This had to be Remy. "Yes, we are," I responded, attempting to sound assertive. I turned to the busboy. "Thank you, Lucien," I said with a smile, trying to ease the tension. He flashed a quick, hesitant smile back, which faded as soon as his eyes met Remy's disapproving gaze. "What y'all want?" Remy asked. Falling into our well-practiced routine, Ash slipped into the role of the good cop, his voice taking on a soothing tone as he addressed Remy. "We heard about the fine establishment you got here, Remy. Thought we'd come and pay a visit." Remy eyed Ash skeptically, lips curling into a smirk. "Well, ain't y'all kind," he drawled in a thick accent. "You're not locals, eh?" My role was starkly different. As the bad cop, my tone was steely, my gaze unwavering. "We're from New Orleans," I answered in, my voice a bit more stern. "We're private investigators." The smirk fell from Remy's face, replaced by a guarded expression. "Oh, novella Leon." Now ain't that something? What y'all investigating so far from home? A girl, Gabrielle, I replied, pulling out a photo of Gabby from his pocket and sliding it across the bar towards Remy. She's been missing for 2 weeks. Her mother's worried sick. Remy barely glanced at the photo before shaking his head. Don't know her. Are you sure? I said, leaning on the counter to narrow the space between us. That's funny, because we have reason to believe Gabby worked here. His gaze darted between us, irritation flickering in his eyes. Who's feeding you all these stories? Ain't no Gabby working here. I know my staff. Remy, I started, my voice firm. I don't appreciate being lied to. You calling me a liar, Cher? He scowled at me with pure disdain. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm calling you, I retorted, reaching into my jacket and pulling out the name tag we had found, sliding it across the bar to him. The badge rested on the counter, its plastic surface catching the dim light of the bar, Gabby emblazoned across it. Remy glanced at the name tag, his lips forming a thin line. This don't mean nothing, he grumbled. Actually, it means a lot, I countered. It means you've been hiring minors to work at a place that serves liquor, I tutted, shaking my head with feigned disappointment. The sheriff might be very interested in that. Remy smirked with confidence. You gonna call him? Go ahead. I ain't hiding nothing. The smirk was a challenge, a dare. I knew he was testing us. In my heart, I knew the sheriff would do nothing. This was a small town where secrets were kept and outsiders were viewed with suspicion. The police had already turned a blind eye to Gabby's disappearance. All right, I started. Let's cut the bullshit. We know Gabby worked here. Now, she's gone missing. We have her name tag and we have her sketches. She drew this bar, she drew you. I lied about the last part, but he didn't know that. Remy's face creased. A lot of girls come through here, Cher. I can't be keeping track of them all. You know, we're just trying to find a missing girl. But your denial, your defensiveness, it does make me wonder, I began to say. Wonder about what? He spat, clearly rattled. About your involvement, I stated, staring him down. Gabby had a secret life here, one that her own mother didn't know about. Then she goes missing. Can you blame us for connecting the dots? He held my gaze, his eyes flaring with defiance, boring into mine. You're barking up the wrong tree, Cher. I ain't got nothing to do with no missing girl. Then why lie about knowing her? I demanded. Why claim she never worked here when we have clear evidence that she did? You've got a lot of explaining to do, Remy. I ain't gotta explain nothing, Remy said. Okay, but you're acting awfully suspicious, I responded. What are you getting at? Remy's voice was sharp and defensive. I gave a nonchalant shrug, maintaining eye contact with Remy. The tension between us was palpable, the air so thick I could almost taste it. I'm not getting at anything. I'm just saying that maybe you know more about Gabby's disappearance than you're letting on. I bit my lip and added, maybe you had something to do with it. Ash squeezed my thigh, as though to tell me I had gone too far. You fucking, Remy started, his face flaming red with anger. That's enough, Ash interjected, his voice low and steady as he stepped forward, placing himself between Remy and me. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. We're not here to cause trouble. We're just looking for Gabby. Remy's gaze shifted from me to Ash, his anger turning to contempt. His broad frame stiffened, and his fingers tightened around the rag in his hand as though strangling it. You're stepping into a world that ain't yours, boy, he said to Ash, his voice a deep, menacing rumble, his words sliding out like a snake in the grass. You and your lady here better learn your place, or you'll find yourselves on the wrong side of the Mississippi. I watched as Ash took it in stride, his expression unchanging, his eyes steady. But I couldn't just stand there and watch this brute belittle my husband. My fingers clenched into tight fists, nails biting into my palm. I felt a prickling heat rise to my cheeks, a sign of the fury stirring inside me. Without hesitation, I slipped in front of Ash, closing the gap between me and Remy. And what world would that be, Remy? I said, my tone icy, matching the hardness in his gaze. The one where you exploit underage girls, or the one where you turn a blind eye when they disappear? He leaned within inches of my face. He was so close that I could see the scars crisscrossing his knuckles, evidence of countless brawls. His voice dropped to a low rumble, the words a chilling whisper between us. You know, this here's Gator country, and they don't discriminate between a meal and an intruder, he said, a deadly undertone to his voice. Gators, they like a nice, fat tourist every now and then. Shame if a couple go missing in Bayou, Hain. The scrape of chairs against the wooden floor behind me sent a shiver down my spine as I realized that the other patrons were getting up and slowly making their way towards us, forming a tightening semicircle around us. I was well aware we were treading on dangerous waters. This wasn't our turf, but my pride and our mission overshadowed the alarm bells in my head. Well, I appreciate your concern, I responded, a sharp edge to my voice. Terror was coursing through me, but I couldn't show it. But I'm not a fucking tourist, and your threats don't scare me. Ash made one last attempt to defuse the situation, his voice steady. Look, buddy, we're not looking for trouble. We're just having a friendly conversation here. At Ash's words, Remy's tense expression softened into a chilling grin. It wasn't warm or friendly, but rather like a bared teeth warning from a cornered animal. The aggression veiled beneath his smile made my blood run cold. This man was clearly not to be taken lightly. You know what? You're right more than me, Remy said, his voice heavy with forced cheerfulness. Where my manners? Let me offer you two a drink on the house. It's the least I can do for such distinguished guests. The tension in the room mounted as Remy's heavy hand slid under the counter, and I felt my heart pound against my chest. Time slowed as the air grew thick with anticipation. My trained eyes caught the minute twitch of his muscles, a telltale sign of his intentions. I could almost feel the icy grip of the weapon Remy was reaching for. A bat, maybe, or more likely a shotgun. Something kept for troublemakers and unwanted guests. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down the back of my neck. I'd kicked the hornet's nest one too many times and was about to get stung. My mind ran calculations, considering how fast I could draw the Glock tucked into the back of my jeans. I had to also consider the dozen other barflies who were also likely armed. If I drew now, it could escalate the situation beyond the point of no return. It would be a bloodbath. Ash's hand tightened around mine, the reassurance I desperately needed. A silent conversation passed between us in the span of a heartbeat. I knew I only had one card to play, and I had to do it quickly. I took a deep breath, and then I dropped the facade. I spoke in flawless Cajun French, the language of my youth, the language of the place I used to call home. Écoutez-moi, mon frère, s'il te plaît. Listen to me, brother, please. I began, my voice steady, authoritative yet filled with the familiar drawl. There was an audible gasp in the room as my heritage was laid bare. My words hung in the air like a declaration. Tu n'as pas besoin de faire ça. You don't have to do this, I pleaded, my eyes fixated on whatever weapon he had hidden. Puta de merda. Fucking hell, Remy uttered, his jaw dropping. Te cadien. You're Cajun? He asked me in disbelief, his eyes narrowing. Oui, I nodded. Cadien ne itavi. Yes, Cajun, born and raised. The admission was like a shockwave through the room. Remy's hand, which had been reaching under the counter, froze in place. The room held its collective breath as Remy slowly withdrew his hand, empty. I felt a sigh of relief catch in my throat as Remy straightened, regarding me with new interest. Oh, quoi tu ne l'as pas dit plus tôt? Why didn't you say so earlier? He asked, his tone no longer aggressive but genuinely curious. Parce que tu ne m'as pas donné la chance. Because you didn't give me a chance, I replied, my voice strong. Remy studied me with a new intensity. Where are you from, petite? He asked, reverting to English, though his tone was softer now. Assumption Parish, a small place called Pierre Part, I replied sheepishly. My past isn't something I like talking about. Remy's focus shifted from me to Ash, his eyebrow raising in a silent question. Need wa, big man. You know French too? Ash met his gaze with a good-natured shrug. Only the curse words she spouts off when I piss her off. The barflies, most of whom had been eyeing us with suspicion and hostility moments ago, broke into chuckles. Remy shook his head with a wry grin. Well, ain't you two a pair? He turned his gaze back at me. He was silent for a long time, scrutinizing me as if trying to piece together a puzzle. Eventually, he sighed heavily, the animosity in his gaze finally receding. Okay, Cher, he said, resignation lacing his voice. Let's talk. Take a seat, he offered, his voice lacking its previous hostility. Ash and I exchanged glances before cautiously accepting his offer. He took a couple of beers from the fridge, popping the caps off and sliding them towards us. Gabby, he began, his gaze steady as he glanced at the photo I'd shown him earlier. That girl played a mean fiddle, could charm the birds from the trees. She was a part of my staff, a damn good one, too. Sweet as pie and harder working than anyone else here. He took a swig of his own beer, his gaze drifting off. She said she needed the extra cash, but who doesn't, right? Remy's fingers played with the rag he'd previously held, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. But something changed these past weeks. The girl seemed tense, worried, like she had the world's troubles resting on her mind. Remy leaned back in his chair, the creaking noise mirroring the weariness in his eyes. You know, this place ain't always easy on the young folks. More often than you'd like, they up and disappear. Poof, like a ghost in the wind. His eyes went back to the picture of Gabby, a look of regret briefly crossing his face. Folks around here, they just shrugged their shoulders. Say they got tired of the bumblebees and the crawfish. Yearning for them big city lights. Remy shook his head, his fingers drumming a mournful rhythm on the counter. Truth is, we don't know why they leave, really. Maybe it is the lure of dem tall buildings and fast cars. Or maybe, just maybe, it's something more. Almost like the Bayou swallows them whole. As I listened to Remy, I noticed in my periphery that Lucien kept glancing at us, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. As he cleared my beer bottle, his other hand quickly reached out, grasping mine. A jolt of surprise surged through me as he pressed something small and folded into my palm. I managed to keep a straight face as I curled my fingers around the paper, feeling the texture of a hastily written note. Our conversation with Remy wrapped up soon after, the lingering silence of the bar echoing the gravity of our discussion. As we got back in the car, the cooling night air was a sharp contrast to the heated interior of the bar. I settled into the passenger seat, feeling the car's familiar worn-in grooves against my back. I slammed the door shut harder than I intended, earning a sharp look from Ash. Rain, you've got to stop doing this. His voice was calm, a contrast to the charged silence that filled the car. I shot him a defensive look. Doing what? He sighed, acting like a loose cannon. One of these days you're going to get us both killed. Please, I scoffed. I handled myself just fine back there. Did you? He challenged, his sharp gaze never leaving mine. Or did you just get lucky this time? I couldn't answer that. He was right, as much as I hated to admit it. Yeah, I said, finally breaking eye contact and staring at the winding road. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Wow, did I actually just hear that? He teased, but I could tell he's relieved. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the crumpled note I'd received earlier from Lucien. But I got something. I smoothed it out on my lap to read, and held it up for Ash to see. I know what happened to Gabby. Meet me at the pier at midnight. To be continued in part 3.